Welcome to our webinar series on participation and representation in the digital age. My name is Jenny Oser, and I'm a professor of politics and government at Ben-Gurion University. I'm also the principal investigator of an ERC project on this topic, and we are honored to welcome our speakers today, Professor Semra Sevi of the University of Toronto and Professor Donald Green from the Columbia University. Our research associate, Dr. Francisca Castro at the University of Madrid, will introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Jenny. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Semra Sevi is an expert on political recruitment and representation and is leading a series of studies examining how AI-based systems inform and persuade voters. On the other hand, Donald Green is a leading political scientist and experimental research with expertise in voting behavior and media effects. And together with Yamil Velez, they co-author an article on chatbot voting advice applications, which will be the focus of today's webinar, alongside additional research on AI and politics. Thank you for joining us. And Semra, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'll pass it on to do some logistics. So to make the most of our time, here's what we'll run the webinar. So first, Semra will speak for about a half hour. Second, I'll introduce our course panelists who've prepared questions in advance based on careful reading of the article. And third, we'll select questions that participants submit to us in the Q&A submission form that I'll put in the chat. So during the talk, we welcome you. Send your questions through this form for the panelists' review. And a final technical note that I'll also put in the chat, if you'd like to see a written transcript during the webinar, we've enabled this feature, and you can activate it by clicking on your Zoom screen's bottom right option labeled More, and then click on Transcript. Thank you for joining us. And Semra, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for having me and my co-authors today. Let me start with sharing my screen. Okay, great. So what I'm going to do today is present two connected projects. They are two papers that sit at the intersection of political behavior research and artificial intelligence. They ask related but distinct questions. And together, I think that they tell us something important and somewhat humbling about what AI can and cannot do to political minds. The first paper is joint work with Yamil Velez and Donald Green at Columbia University. We've been working on this paper for about 3 years, and it was recently published on PNES, so you can take a look at it there. And the second is joint work with John McKeek, also from the University of Toronto, and we have a preprint of that paper online in case you'd like to take a look. So let me start first with the chatbot voting advice paper. The core question is simple. Essentially, we're asking, can we use a conversational AI chatbot to help young people, politically unaffiliated adults, understand where the parties stand on issues that they care about, and does that understanding change how they feel about those parties? So let me see why this. Okay, great. So the figure that you see on your screen right now shows the U.S. presidential vote share among 18 to 29-year-olds going as far back as 1972. Young voters, as you can see, have leaned Democratic since 1976, with one exception in 1984, when Reagan swept everyone. Democrats shortly afterwards rebuilt their advantage, and it widened dramatically from 2000, peaking with Obama in 2008. But look at the right edge. What you see here is a 2024 New York Times Siena poll, which was projecting just about 47% for Biden versus 45% for Trump among young voters. That's a 2-point lead. And compared to Biden's 24-point margin in 2020 and Clinton's 19-point margin in 2026, this is quite a difference. So I should note that no Republican has actually won the youth vote since 1988. So what this figure kind of illustrates is something important, which is that young voters' partisan attachments are genuinely fluid, and that fluidity is what makes this group theoretically interesting, and what raises the question our study tries to answer, which is, can targeted information about where the parties stand guide that process? And the numbers bear this out. So in 2020, just 51% of 18 to 24-year-olds voted compared to 75% of seniors. Data from the comparative study of electoral system shows that 54% of adults under 25 express no party preference at all, and that they score lower on political knowledge, even after controlling for education and interest. So low knowledge, weak partisanship, high openness is exactly the profile where information should matter the most. Party identification is one of the most stable constructs in political science. For adults with established identities, it's essentially immovable by brief informational interventions, but young people don't yet have that anchor. So the question is, what happens when they're given clear, personalized information about where parties stand on the issues that they actually care about? That theoretical foundation is the spatial model, which is that voters should support the party closest to their issue positions. The problem is that the mechanism requires voters to know where the parties stand, and many young voters don't actually know, especially on issues that are outside media headlines. So our intervention tries to solve that, and there's a crucial twist here, which is personalization. Rather than asking everyone about the same fixed issues, we ask each respondent what matters most to them and then build a conversation around that. There are tools that already exist to test this. They're called voting advice applications, or VAAs. They've been widely used in Europe for decades. They match users to the closest party based on their issue preferences. They're popular, but experimental evidence is considerably weaker than observational studies suggest, largely because they already attract people who are engaged. And there are a few other limitations with VAAs, which is that they rely on a static, pre-specified issue list. So if your concern isn't on that issue, then you're kind of out of luck. So they assume also a level of political knowledge that less engaged adults don't often have. So we move to a conversational format, a chat bot that essentially can meet respondents where they are, discuss whatever issues that they care about, and then adapt it in real time. And so the risk with these types of chatbots is that they can hallucinate. LLMs tend to generate confident sounding misinformation, which could be seen as unacceptable in a political context. So the solution we came up with was a retrieval augmented generation framework. So instead of letting the model draw freely on its training data, we constrain it to curated knowledge base of a researcher verified party documents, including state platforms, state voter guides, national speeches, and town halls. So every response is grounded in official sources. We get that conversational flexibility I talked about without the misinformation risk. And so this diagram here shows the two-stage architecture, but like the key constraint here is that the model cannot go outside this curated corpus, and that's what makes this safe for political use. So let me explain what our project contributes. As I mentioned, we developed a CAVAA using large language models and a RAG approach with knowledge base drawn from high quality official sources and quality assurance from domain experts that can converse specifically about the respondent's own issues and not something else. We then carry out a 3 placebo-controlled randomized experiment assessing the effect of this reg-powered CA-VAA on the issue knowledge, voting intentions, and party attitudes. And then we conducted demanding tests of issue-driven party alignment by focusing specifically on unaligned young voters, the group that is most plausibly open to influence. So we have 3 studies, and each of them target unaffiliated adults aged between 18 and 34 in the United States. The first study was conducted in Cloud Research Connect, the second on Prolific, and finally the third one was on YouGov. And as you'll notice, the date range is quite wide. The first one started in December 2023, and then the YouGov study is basically a year later in November 2024. And the basic concept is the same across all of these studies. We elicit each respondent's core issue, then randomly assign them to the CAVAA bot or a trivia placebo bot, and then we measure party issue knowledge, partisan identification, self-reported vote choice, and attitudinal index. So let me say a few words about the sample and the rationale that we had. So the participants are unaffiliated 18 to 34-year-olds who, when they were asked about party identification, selected independent, none, other, or preferred not to say. So these are genuinely non-partisans. They are not weak partisans. You might also be wondering why we conducted 3 studies. We did this because we wanted to improve statistical power, especially with study 3, to maximize the feasible samples of unaffiliated young adults on across different panel providers, and to ensure data quality by not relying on a single source. In practice, of course, we also basically exhausted the supply of eligible participants on Cloud Research and Prolific, which is why the third study with YouGov was necessary. So the design is fully pre-registered. Participants first complete a pre-treatment survey measuring political knowledge, issue preferences, party placements on polarized issues, and then crucially, they tell us their most important issue in their own words. And then they are randomly assigned to the treatment, which is an interactive VAA chatbot that discusses party positions on the participant's stated core issue, or to the placebo control, which is a trivia chatbot posing as Benjamin Franklin, engaging in a time equivalent with the VAA bot, but with 0 political content. And so after the interaction, all participants complete a post-treatment survey measuring accuracy on party positions, on the core issue, and on other topics like abortion and gun rights, as well as attachment, party attachment, and attitudes. So this is the exact prompt that we use to elicit the respondent's core issue. So participants are asked to describe a political issue that they care deeply about in their own words and their position on it. And they're given a concrete example so that they can see the format. And in this case, it's an example about farm subsidies. And then they're told, now write your own brief statement. It's an open-ended format, and that's important because we're not imposing an issue. We're meeting respondents where they are and letting the conversation be driven by what genuinely matters to the respondent. And here's what a typical exchange with the VAA bot looks like. The respondent could either type out in their own words, or they can click on one of these pre-made bubbles to start the conversation. And then the users, as you see here, is in blue, and the bot responses are in gray. And notice that the bot's responses are concise, they are grounded in party documents, and they are balanced. So this characterizes both parties without advocating for one or the other. The conversational format allows users to ask follow-up questions, go deeper on a particular aspect, or redirect to a related issue. So after about 4 exchanges, the interface presents a gamified unlock, which users see a message prompting them to ask which party is closest to their views. So it's important in here to emphasize that the bot doesn't volunteer a recommendation. The user has to ask. And when they do, the bot reflects the conversation back to them and then describes how the parties differ on the issues that they discuss. So again, the goal for this project is to help users locate themselves relative to the parties, not to steer them toward one party. And here is the analytical approach. So we estimate 2 types of models. For issue knowledge, we compute average treatment effects. So does the chatbot improve participants' ability to correctly place the parties on their core issue and on general issues? And for downstream outcomes, we look at party effect and vote choice. We recognize that the expected direction of the effect depends on which party is closer to the respondent's issue. So we hand classify each respondent's core issue, which is Democratic aligned or Republican aligned, and then estimate conditional average treatment effects within those subgroups. Now for the results. This is the key figure we have 4 panels, one for each study and one for the meta-analysis on the right. Each panel has 3 rows. So the top row is issue accuracy, the middle row is pro-democratic effect, and then the bottom row is vote choice. The x-axis is the treatment estimate effect. So positive means that the VAA increased the outcome. The black markers show accuracy on the core issue, the one that they actually discussed with the chatbot. And the gray marker shows accuracy on general issues. So these are issues they didn't discuss with the chatbot. And across all 3 studies and in the meta-analysis, the bot significantly improves core issues accuracy. So the meta-analytic estimate is 12.7 percentage points. And I want to put that into context for you a little bit. That gap is actually larger than the knowledge difference between college graduates and those without a high school diploma in our sample. So it's a meaningful educational effect. There's also improvement in the general issue accuracy. That's about 4.3 percentage points. So it suggests that there's some spillover from learning about your core issue to other issues. But now if you look at the middle and the bottom rows, for pro-democratic affect and vote choice, the picture is completely different. Everything clusters near 0. There's some slightly positive, some slightly negative, but none reliably different from 0. So we can say that the chatbot works as an educational tool. It does not work as a partisan alignment. So let me state the findings in a more plainly way. We see consistent evidence of increase in issue-based learning. Users better understand party stances on their most important issue, and to a lesser extent on issues more generally. And this holds whether the respondent used the VAA bot or the ideology bot that we had in study 2, but ended up merging because the results look similar. We see little evidence of downstream effects on vote choice or partisan attitudes, and providing proximity information to young independents seems inefficient to induce them to align with a party. So this highlights what I think is a key challenge in the literature, which is that information alone does not shift partisan attitudes because people can learn where the parties stand without that knowledge transforming how they feel about those parties. Okay, because we're kind of short on time and I want to also present the second study, I'm going to skip over the next steps, but I'm happy to come back to this in the Q&A should you have questions about this. Okay, so I'm now going to turn to the second paper, which takes a different angle on what AI can do to political minds. The starting point for this project is the finding from Costello et al. In a science paper in 2024 that essentially argued that generative AI is quite good at persuasion, even for strongly held opinions. And their striking demonstration was that AI can reduce beliefs in conspiracy theories through a short dialogue, and this can actually last for weeks and months. But there's an important limitation in those initial studies that said AI is quite good in persuasion, and that is that they focused on counter-attitudinal persuasion. So they try to move people away from a belief, typically a false one, by challenging it. We were curious whether generative AI is equally good at pro versus counter-attitudinal persuasion. So can it only weaken beliefs, or can it also strengthen them? And we wanted to keep the focus on relatively strongly held opinions because that's the most challenging and most politically relevant scenario. Most political persuasion in the real world targets people who already hold views, not people who are neutral or uncertain about a view. So in this study, we ran a two-wave survey experiment with a 3x3 factorial design. The two experimental factors were conditions, so you were either in the placebo, strengthen, or weaken condition, and time, which we measured at pre-treatment, post-treatment, and follow-up. So a few details about the study. The treatment involves 3 rounds of conversation with GPT-4o, which was prompted according to the assigned condition. So if you had strengthen, then the AI was instructed to strengthen your initial views. If you had weaken, it did the opposite. And the placebo condition were a non-political topic, so whether to get a pet or not. So it had the same conversational format, and 0 political content. And the follow-up delay is between 10 to 21 days, giving us a measure of whether any effects persist beyond the immediate post-treatment period. So for this study, our participants are Canadian citizens aged 18 or older. They were recruited by Leger, and we ran this study last summer. We had 2 different waves. First wave had just over 1,900 respondents, and the second wave had just over 1,200 respondents. So we have a 66% retention rate, which is consistent with comparable 2-wave studies like ours. The outcome variable here is belief confidence in a personalized political statement, which is measured on a 101 point slider scale. So 0 means definitely false, 50 means uncertain, and 100 means definitely true. The statements are personalized, so they're generated by AI, summarizing each participant's own open-ended description of their political view on their assigned topic. So this isn't a generic statement we wrote. It's a statement that is derived from what the participants themselves said. And that's what makes it personal and what it makes the subsequent conversation feel like a genuine dialogue. Participants were randomly assigned to one of 5 political topics. These were the topics that were the most salient at the time that we did our survey. So they included issues like Trump and global affairs, the economy, housing, immigration, social and environmental concerns. An issue assignment was designed to achieve 2 things. We wanted to obtain a balanced sample across salient political issues, and we also wanted to increase pre-treatment belief confidence variability, so we're not just studying people who feel strongly about one issue type. So these are genuinely contested, evolving topics. They're not historical questions with clear answers, and they're certainly not conspiracy theories. They're the kind of issues that people actually argue about, which makes them more demanding and we believe ecologically valid test of AI persuasion. So here's the overall structure of the study, but I will skip through this and walk you through a concrete example so you get a sense of the design. So a participant is assigned a topic. In this case, it's the housing topic. They write about housing and lack of resources. The AI reads this and then generates a one-sentence summary. So here they say that there is a lack of resources and education to support individuals in buying and owning their first home, including inadequate financial education in high schools about the home buying process. The participant sees the summary and then rates their confidence. So in this example, they say 82 out of 100 that they believe it's almost certainly true. That 82 becomes our baseline. So everything that follows is measured relative to it. So here now, the participant enters the conversation. This example is an example of the weakening condition. So the AI is instructed to reduce confidence in the participant's stated beliefs. The AI doesn't lead with a blunt challenge, as you can see. It opens empathetically, acknowledging the frustration that the participant expressed, and then it introduces complicating information. It mentions existing government programs, available resources, initiatives aimed at younger buyers, and then the participant responds, the AI adapts, and then over 3 rounds of genuine back and forth conversation, the AI tailors its approach based on what the participant is actually saying. So it's looking for the most relevant counter considerations. This is a key feature. It's not a static message. It's an interactive exchange responsive to the individual's reasoning. And then after the conversation, the participant rates their confidence again on the same statement. So in our example, the confidence drops from 82 to 70%. That's a meaningful 12-point reduction in a person's certainty about a belief that they came in strongly endorsing after a single brief conversation. Then, 10 to 21 days later, we contact the participant again and ask the same question. How confident are they in that summary statement? In our example, confidence has recovered somewhat. So it's now 77, but it hasn't returned all the way back to 82. So the effect persists. So it was 82 before, 70 immediately after, 77 at follow-up. A single brief AI conversation produced a durable reduction in how confident this person is in the belief that they held strongly coming into the study. So here's the central result from the full sample. The y-axis here is the average effect on belief confidence relative to the placebo group. The x-axis shows us the 2 post-treatment time points, so immediately after the conversation and at follow-up. The red line is the weakening treatment, and the blue line is the strengthening treatment. So look at the red line first. There's a clear, significant negative effect at post-treatment, and this reduction persists at follow-up. So there's no meaningful decay between the 2 time points. The weakening effect is durable. Now look at the blue line. The estimate sits close to 0 at both time points and never approaches statistical significance. So there's no detectable strengthening effect. The main finding here is that AI can reliably weaken belief certainty, but it cannot reliably strengthen it. So the asymmetry is real and it seems to persist. Now, before you accept that conclusion, you should push on it a little bit, and we do as well. So can we attribute the failure to detect a strengthening effect due to a measurement problem? After all, the mean pre-treatment belief confidence is 86.7 out of 100, and the proportion of pre-treatment responses at the scale ceiling at 100 is 36.6%. So these are frankly challenging conditions for measurement. If more than a third of your participants are already at the top of the scale, then there simply might not be a lot of room in the scale to register further increases. This is a legitimate concern, and quite frankly, I want to be open about it. But the high baseline is a feature of our design. It reflects how real political beliefs look, but it does create a measurement challenge for the strengthening condition. So while it might look like there's a ceiling effect, the question we care about is whether it is substantive or due to a measurement artifact. So there's a telling pattern here. Belief confidence drifts upwards across all conditions over time, including our placebo. So in other words, everyone's confidence tends to increase slightly just from being in the study, and the drift is statistically significant. This means the scale is capable of detecting upward movement. The placebo group shows it, but we're not able to detect strengthening above and beyond that drift. We've also done some other robustness checks to accommodate this. We believe that we cannot just write this result off as a measurement artifact. Okay, so we also ask whether these effects vary depending on whether how certain people were to begin with. So we added a pre-treatment belief confidence as a moderator with a conservative confidence interval using the multivariate T distribution method. The x-axis now shows us the initial belief level from 50, which, as you might remember, means uncertain, to 100, which means completely certain. And the y-axis is the conditional average treatment effect. So the key finding here is that there's a significant negative interaction between both treatments and pre-treatment belief confidence. Weakening is more effective at higher baseline belief levels. The more certain you are going in, the more the AI can shake that certainty. And at the initial level of, say, 90%, the weakening effect is about 4 percentage points immediately after treatment. The strengthening appears more effective at lower baseline belief levels. There's a hint of a positive effect for people who weren't very certain to begin with, but these effects are small, and the confidence intervals overlap across much of the range. So to understand why this asymmetry exists, we analyze the conversations themselves. This part of the study is exploratory, but we use GPT 5.2 to generate ratings of each conversation on a 0 to 10 scale across several attributes. So for the AI responses, we have compliance, persuasiveness, factuality, accuracy, and validation. The bar chart shows estimated marginal mean ratings by condition, placebo in gray, and then we have weakening in red and strengthening in blue for each attribute. We wanted to know whether we can attribute asymmetries in treatment effects to AI response quality, and we think this is probably not the case. As you can see, factuality and accuracy are similar across treatment conditions. The AI is not producing lower quality information in one condition versus the other. In fact, compliance, persuasiveness, and validation are actually higher and being rated as more persuasive and validating in the strengthening condition, and yet it doesn't work. So the asymmetry cannot be attributed to the AI producing weaker content in the strengthening condition. So if the AI is doing an equally good job in both conditions, the asymmetry might lie in how participants respond to the conversation. So we use the same approach, GPT 5.2 ratings, ordinal regressions, and now we're rating participants' responses across novelty, redundancy, bolstering motivation, defense motivation, and perceived validations. Can we attribute asymmetries to differences in task demands and user cognitive responses? And we think this is possibly the case. AI responses.
Semra will transition to Q&A in about 2 minutes.
That's great. AI responses are perceived as less novel and more redundant in the strengthening condition compared to the weakening. So in other words, when the AI makes pro-attitudinal arguments, participants tend to feel like they're hearing things that they already knew. Users show stronger bolstering motivation in strengthening and stronger defense than motivations in weakening. So the strengthening condition, participants are looking for confirmation of what they believe. In the weakening condition, they're actively defending against it. Okay, so to wrap, Let me close with what all this means. Conversational AI can influence belief confidence or pre-existing political beliefs and counter attitudinal persuasion, but perhaps not in the pro-attitudinal persuasion. The asymmetry is real, it's robust across specifications, and it's durable over time. This asymmetry is likely not due to prompting issues or nuance differences, as I showed you on the previous two slides. There's some indication that the differences stem from task demands and more cognitive responses. Specifically, the counter-attitudinal information is experienced as more novel, while the pro-attitudinal information is experienced as redundant. Okay, so I'll take one more minute just to close with reflecting on how these two papers connect. And I want to address something directly. And that's that there's a lot of anxiety right now about AI and democratic politics. The fear stated plainly is that AI will be used to manipulate extremists, harden partisan divisions, flip elections, and undermine the epistemic foundations of democracy. These are serious concerns, and I don't want to dismiss or undermine them. But I think our two studies offer a useful corrective to some of the more alarming framings. The first paper that I presented to you today asks, can AI be used to inform voters and steer them toward a party? We gave young independents personalized, accurate, well-designed information about party positions. We used the sophisticated RAG system to prevent misinformation. We focused on exactly the type of population most likely to be moved, and the chatbot did teach them things, meaningfully so, but it did not move their partisan identities, not even a little bit. The second paper asks, can AI harden political beliefs, make people more certain, more entrenched, more polarized? We directly tested this. We explicitly instructed GPT-4o to strengthen people's existing political views using every conversational tool available to it, and it failed. So I want to be careful here. Absence of evidence does not mean there's evidence of absence. And these are two studies in particular contexts. There are certainty settings, longer exposures, more sophisticated systems, more targeted manipulations, where the effects could be larger and more troubling. So we should keep investigating. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Wow, for those of us who know Semra, it's not a surprise to have her go above and beyond. And for us to have, this is the first talk in our series where we have both published work and work in the pipeline, work that is working paper that we'll see soon to published in published outlets, to see the whole range of work that's coming ahead. So thank you so much, Semra. We're going to transition now to a first round of Q&A. Students in the course and the course panelists leading this first round focused on the first of the two papers that Semra presented. So we'll start with that round of questions. Those who are joining as participants, you're welcome to add additional questions to the form in the chat. So returning to our first question of the webinar panelists, we're turning to Shira Zahavi, who also studies communications. Shira.
Hi, so first of all, thank you very much. I think it was one of my favorite articles. I also did my presentation on it. So my question is, the study makes me curious to learn more about why there is a gap between increased political knowledge and the lack of change in political attitudes or voting intention. Do you have new ideas on this now since you published the study?
Yeah, great question. How do we do this, Jennifer? Should I answer some and Dawn will answer others, or?
Yeah, well, for the Q&A, we're honored to have both Semra, who gave the talk now, and Don Green, the co-author, as we introduced at the beginning. So however you would like, you're both unmuted, however you both want to handle the Q&A. I'll also note that we have here, those who can see in the gallery, we have John McKeek, who is one of the co-authors. Is that right, Semra, of the second paper? Yes. So whenever the co-authors wanted to join in, you're welcome to.
Okay,
and
well,
we'll take it one question at a time. So go ahead.
I'm happy to go first, and Dawn can add if he wants.
Great.
I think this is a great question. The sample is independent, so maybe they identify as independents because they don't want to align with a given party, especially given how polarized the U.S. is right now. So we are doing more of these chatbot studies in other settings, which also will include Canada, where there are more parties. So it will be interesting to see how the effects. Pan out in that context. I guess that's what I would say, Don.
Sure. I guess what I would say is that partisan attachments tend to be quite long lasting, not only in the United States, but a wide array of different democratic polities. And you might be interested to know that I personally have failed utterly to change party attachments despite more than a decade of experimental interventions designed to, move people in the Democratic or Republican direction. And so this kind of failure is not unique to this study, but it is a remarkable commentary on what something that Phil Converse called dynamic constraint. Converse had this idea that if you change people's views about one thing, that should precipitate other changes in things that follow logically from that first change. And his point was actually that's not how people typically reason. That you would think that, if this were like a logical syllogism, you would start with, well, I am closer to the X party on this issue, not that issue, and this issue is something that I really care about. Would precipitate a change in the direction of that issue. But actually, it's not as though people reason and calculate their party attachments in that way.
Excellent. Thank you. It's an honor to have the co-authors here in general, but for those who don't know, Donna's coming in from the West Coast, so it's like almost around 7 a.m. this time. It's a serious co-author commitment to political science. We'll proceed now to our next question, which is from U.S.A, who also studies psychology.
Hi, thank you for your time. It was very interesting and it definitely increased my knowledge, even though I also presented this article. My question is, do you see this AI bot as the most effective tool for increasing information, or could a different approach be even more effective, such as adding a side-by-side comparison features, maybe?
Go ahead, jump into that one, Semra.
Sure.
Okay.
I think that the chatbot is quite good at the specific task that it's designed for, which is the personalized conversational delivery that we have. Because if we recall the for the knowledge gain, it was 12.7 percentage point improvement in core issue accuracy, which is larger than the education gap in our sample. So by that benchmark, it's doing something real. But you do raise an interesting design question, which is the question of side-by-side comparison format showing both parties' position on a given issue, perhaps in some sort of parallel columns, like you would have in a conjoint experiment. My intuition is that the formats are probably complementary rather than competing. A side-by-side comparison might be better for a quick reference tool during an election campaign. So might be interesting to look at something like that in a future study. Don?
No, you raise an interesting question. Actually, I'm going to zoom back a little bit and say, the broader context within which your question is posed is what is the intrinsic motivation of the user to get this knowledge that we are imparting? We're sort of like plopping it down in front of them as though they were interested, but really we're kind of contriving a situation where they are interested. And I think one of the interesting questions is, what about an alternative design in which you encourage people who might not otherwise know to seek out this information, that they can find it right at their fingertips if they ask it now? And so that they have a little bit more intrinsic motivation, and they might be a little bit more willing to look at, a kind of menu of options and differences between the party in order to figure out where they stand. But that it basically returns us to Semra's earlier point about the role of intrinsic motivation. many of the people who do not have a party affiliation do not have an affiliation because they're not interested in politics. They're not engaged by politics. And that's especially true for young voters. So part of the meta question is, how and under what conditions can one get somebody to have enough intrinsic motivation to extract that information from a bot? And I should say that when you think about political persuasion in general, bots play a very interesting theoretical role. Why? Because on the one hand, they have source credibility, presumably if they're not hallucinating and doing other not so great things. But the other is that they're anonymous, or it's not as that's why to the extent that we're talking about people searching out information that is sensitive in nature, bots are perfect. And so this is the kind of area we are in is not particularly sensitive, and so it's not particularly aligned with that special role that bots would play.
Mm, really interesting. Thank you so much. We'll transition to our next question now, which is from Zainab Hardan, who also studies communication.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Semra. It was truly insightful hearing the article explained firsthand from the author. My question is, do you think that repeated long-term exposure to AI voting chatbots could eventually influence partisans' identity or voting behavior if used for a long period of time than in your study, like for several months? Thank you.
Yeah, I think the dosage is actually genuinely one of the most important questions in this literature. I suspect it matters enormously. Everything we know from political socialization research suggests that identity formation is slow, it's a cumulative process. It isn't a typical single conversation that shifts your partisan identification or identity. It's repeated exposure to information, social reinforcement from people around you, and then a gradual sense that a particular party represents people like you. We are actually in the process of designing a longitudinal study. We're thinking of doing this in classroom settings in Canada, where students will interact with the chatbot repeatedly over a semester. We're thinking a panel design where participants have weekly conversations leading up to perhaps some sort of event like an election. So we're doing that now. I think, guess one of the challenges is that you lose clean experimental control as you extend the intervention over time, because other things can be happening in people's political environments simultaneously to the treatments. But this is a design that we've thought about, and we're in the middle of designing it. To you, Don.
I think it's a great question, and I think you gave a great answer. I think the only thing that I would add is, we live in a very fluid environment with respect to AI and elite discourse. It could be the case that a leading political figure, and you can all imagine which figure I'm thinking of, denounces or advocates that people go to AI for the truth about this or that. And so that kind of politicization of AI as a political source is the wild card in the deck in terms of overtime exposure.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question is from Anna Gorovich, who also studies communications.
Oh, hi, thank you so much for your time. It was really interesting to hear from you. And I'm curious whether you considered including a traditional static voting advice application as one of your experimental conditions. Since it wasn't included in this study, I'd be interested to hear how you think it might compare to the AI chatbot and your control condition trivia bot.
That's an interesting question. We don't include it in our PNES study. I don't think we talked about this actually. I guess it would have been a cool three-arm design if we had the trivia bot, placebo, static VAA, and the conventional alternative, and the CA VAA that we have. this could probably be a cool follow-up. I'm aware that some others have done a similar design where they have the static VAA and they find smaller effect sizes for political knowledge gain. So I'm not entirely certain if we would find much difference. I think the personalized nature of our CAVAI is a plus in our study. Perhaps that is what is doing most of the work in terms of the political knowledge. I don't think we would find much difference with party effect and vote choice if we had that static arm, but let's see what Don says.
I think it's an interesting design wrinkle. I think, if anything, our study is a kind of moment in time, and if anything, the world is moving past our chatbot. Why? Because our chatbot, I think we'll look back at it and say, "Oh, how quaint!" Back in the days when the chatbot had no visualization.
Okay, so hello. Thank you.
Oh wait, but hold a moment. We'll see
Okay.
if Don reconnects because the question relates to, well, that, and we can do that to welcome him back in. So that's great, and we'll in the meanwhile shift to Chagai, and Chagai, Semra, and John can take the question. Go ahead, Chagai, with your question.
Hi, so thank you about all the presentation. It was really interesting. And my question is, do you think this kind of chatbot experiments will lead to the same results outside of the United States? For example, could it be different effects on multiply system like Israel?
Great. Thanks, Chagai. Well, welcome back, Don. We have a follow-up question on the comment that got frozen, but we'll shift now to allow Semra to answer the question just asked about whether there would be similar effects outside of the US of the first article. Go ahead, Semra.
Yeah, it's an important external validity question, and I'm genuinely uncertain what is exactly what we would find by extending to other countries, but we are doing this, so we'll be able to say more once we have the result. We're not doing this in Israel, but we are doing it in Canada, which has a multi-party system similar to what you have in Israel. We'll be able to say more about it at that time. I think one thing to keep in mind that the US has a two-party system, which creates a very specific structure for our study. So we classified, as I mentioned in the presentation, respondents issue as Democrat aligned or Republican aligned. And then the proximity logic is quite clean in that sense. You either you learn where the parties stand and update toward a closer one. In a multi-party system like we have in Canada and I guess in Israel as well, where you might have five, and in your case, maybe up to seven parties, there might be some meaningful differences in ideology and identity appeals. The prediction kind of becomes a bit more complicated. So we'll be able to say more about that once we have collected the data from Canada, but we're excited to see. I don't know if the results will be the same. I suspect maybe not. I do think that maybe young people have more choice in Canada when there's more than two parties that are dominating. So we might see some differences, but it will be fascinating to compare that with our results in the US. Don, to you.
Sorry about dropping off. The joke is that I'm in a developing country. The issue is a very interesting one because, of course, when you look across the globe, parties are configured very differently in terms of the kinds of social groups that they are affiliated with. And one of the interesting questions from the standpoint of cross-national comparison is, would the bot be more persuasive in an area that is in a place, in a moment in time where the parties are not particularly programmatically divided? In other words, could you find it easier to move people from one party to another in situations where other things kind of dominate the agenda? And there are many countries like that. that. On the other hand, you might say, well, maybe it's harder to move people in a party system that is ethnically dominated or divided along religious lines and that sort of thing. And that's why one of the studies that we're launching now, and maybe Semra mentioned it while I was off, is a study that is asking people to imagine how the parties link up to social groups, because many people are unaware of that connection, especially people who are young and already unaligned. And to the extent that you gave them that information, then they would perhaps find a place for themselves in that array of different groups.
Thank you. So our last question from the course panelists to round this out relates back to the question, to the topic Don was discussing of maybe the current chatbot will be considered quaint at some point. And let's turn to hear that question from Cleo.
Great.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you, Jennifer. First of all, thank you for the presentation. My question is about the technology behind the bot. Do you have plans to add more and new features like images of videos? And also, what other technical advancements do you think could make this bot even more effective for voters? Thank you.
Don, why don't you go first?
Well, as I mentioned, I think that the audiovisual revolution is really on the edge of feasibility. It's a lot more expensive to do it as part of an academic study now, given the limitations of the survey interface, but that'll soon be overcome. I think that we're probably maybe a year or two away from that being a relatively inexpensive research option. But of course, the world will be experiencing this probably in a matter of months as these advances. It's hard to imagine what it means to have trillions of dollars pumped into the research and development of an industry, but that is what is happening now. So the pace of technological advancement is very, very fast. And I think one of the interesting things is, what if your preferred bot had the image or the audiovisual image of somebody who was very credible to you? In other words, not only would you have a personalized message, but you'd have a personalized source. And that's a kind of interesting wrinkle that we cannot do presently, but we will soon be able to.
You anticipated that was one of our top questions for a next round. So thank you for already addressing it. As we wrap up now, perhaps let's hear some final words if you want to add in anything, either Semra or Don, to wrap up the key takeaways that you see from these research and moving forward.
Semra.
No, I think we've covered a lot, Don.
Okay.
I think one of the things I would say is that because this area of research is so new, anybody can really jump in and make a meaningful contribution. And I think that one of the things that we are really unable to do very easily is to get a group of people who are ready and interested to learn from an AI engine. And that's the kind of thing that requires a blend of the kind of survey research that we're doing and the kind of field research that probably should be done and could be done relatively inexpensively. So if you're working with a group of high school students, a community group of some sort, and you had people who are actually intrinsically interested, randomly assigning them to one of these kinds of experimental channels would be quite informative.
Wow. An amazing note to end on, as in our class, students are considering what to write their BA seminar paper and their next MA research proposal, and it sounds like a strong encouragement to consider that direction. So thank you, Semra, thank you, Don, thank you to our webinar panelists and everyone who joined us today. And we look forward to welcoming all of you in the upcoming webinars in this series. We have an upcoming webinar that takes place on June 10th with Catherine DeVries on gender attitudes and political engagement. We look forward to seeing you then and in future webinars of the series. So thanks to everyone and see you next time.